Eleanor Bennett sighed as she sorted through the contents of her grandmother's attic in the old Boston brownstone. 3 weeks after the funeral, the task of clearing out 96 years of memories felt overwhelming. Rain tapped against the dormer window as she opened a dust-covered trunk. Inside lay dozens of photographs, their edges yellowed with age. "Mom, I found something," she called downstairs. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted a formal portrait from 1921. A baby, in an elaborate christening gown sitting on a velvet chair. The child's cherubic face beamed with delight, and the photograph's quality was remarkable for its era. Eleanor smiled at the innocent scene until her eyes fixed on something unusual in the baby's tiny hands. "That's strange," she murmured, squinting at the object. Professor Daniel Winters adjusted his glasses as Eleanor slid the photograph across his desk at the Boston Historical Society. "My grandmother never mentioned this photo," Eleanor explained. "I found it while cleaning out her house." Daniel studied the portrait with professional curiosity, then froze. "Where did you say your grandmother grew up?" "Salem." "Why?" "Because what this baby is holding shouldn't exist in 1921, he said, reaching for his magnifying glass. "Not in this form." Eleanor leaned forward, her heart quickening. "What do you mean?" "This isn't just an ordinary family heirloom," Daniel replied, his voice dropping. "This could change what we know about one of Boston's most notorious unsolved crimes." The photograph lay beneath specialized lights in Daniel's office as he carefully examined every detail. Outside, the Boston skyline glowed in the late afternoon sun. "The baby is approximately 1 year old," Daniel noted, making careful observations. "The clothing and photography style are consistent with 1921 New England portraiture." Eleanor paced nervously. "But what about the object?" Daniel adjusted the magnification. "That's what concerns me. The baby is holding what appears to be a pocket watch with unusual engravings. Look closely at the design." Eleanor peered through the magnifier and gasped. Engraved on the watch case was an intricate pattern she recognized instantly. The same pattern on her grandmother's silver music box. "This watch belonged to Thomas Haverty," Daniel said gravely, "a prominent banker whose murder shook Boston in 1920. The watch was reported stolen the night of his death and never recovered." Eleanor's voice wavered. "That's impossible. This photo was taken in 1921. My grandmother would have been the baby in this picture." "Exactly," Daniel replied, "which raises disturbing questions about your family's connection to an unsolved murder." Daniel reached for an old newspaper clipping from his files. The headline read, "Banker slain in home, valuable watch missing." The investigation implicated several suspects, but resulted in no convictions. Daniel explained, "The watch was considered the key to identifying the killer." Eleanor stared at her grandmother's innocent face in the photograph, unable to reconcile. "The sweet child with such darkness. We need to find out how this watch came into your family's possession," Daniel said quietly. "And why someone would photograph a baby holding evidence from a murder investigation." Eleanor's hands trembled as she dialed her mother's number from Daniel's office. The conversation was brief but illuminating. "Mom insists she knows nothing about a pocket watch or any connection to a banker named Haverty," Eleanor explained, hanging up. "But she sounded nervous and mentioned that Grandma had a locked box she never allowed anyone to open. We need to find that box," Daniel replied. Back at the brownstone, they discovered the small mahogany case hidden behind a loose brick in the basement wall. Its brass lock, green with age, resisted their attempts until Daniel carefully applied a lockpick tool. Inside lay a folded newspaper clipping from 1920, identical to Daniel's, a small diary bound in faded leather, and a tarnished key. But no watch. Eleanor opened the diary with trembling fingers. The first entry, dated March 15, 1920, was written in her great-grandmother's flowing script. "Robert came home late again. I fear his association with Mr. Haverty will be our undoing." Daniel leaned closer. "Robert was your great-grandfather?" Eleanor nodded, turning pages rapidly. "He worked as an accountant for several wealthy Boston families." She stopped suddenly at an entry from October 18, 1920. "Listen to this. Robert burned his clothes tonight. He says we are saved, but at what cost? The weight of the watch and... My hand feels like judgment itself. Daniel's expression darkened. That's the day after Haverty's murder. Eleanor continued reading, her voice barely above a whisper. Heaven forgive me, but I've hidden the evidence where no one would think to look. In plain sight, immortalized in innocence. She looked up, realization dawning. The portrait. She hid the truth in a photograph of her baby, my grandmother, knowing no one would suspect. But why keep evidence implicating your family? Daniel wondered. There must be more to this story, Eleanor murmured, turning another page. The following morning, Eleanor and Daniel visited the Massachusetts State Archives, where records from Boston's financial institutions were meticulously preserved. Rain streaked the windows as they pored over dusty ledgers from Merchants National Bank, where Thomas Haverty had served as director. Here, Daniel said, pointing to an entry. Robert Bennett was employed as an accountant from 1918 to 1920. He was terminated 1 week before Haverty's murder. Eleanor frowned. That contradicts the diary. Great-grandmother wrote about Robert's association with Haverty continuing until the day of the murder. A helpful archivist brought additional records, correspondence, between bank officials. One letter, dated October 10, 1920, caught their attention. Bennett continues to make accusations regarding discrepancies in foreign accounts. His termination is necessary to maintain confidence in our institution. Your great-grandfather wasn't just an employee, Daniel realized. He was a whistleblower. Eleanor scanned another document, a private ledger bearing Robert Bennett's handwriting. The final pages detailed transfers of enormous sums to private accounts in Switzerland. Haverty was embezzling, Eleanor whispered. Robert discovered it. Daniel nodded grimly. Which gives your great-grandfather motive for murder. Or makes him another victim, Eleanor countered. Look at these dates. The last entry is October 16th, the day before Haverty's death. What if Robert wasn't terminating his relationship with Haverty that night? What if he was threatening exposure? Daniel considered this. We need to find records of what happened to Robert after Haverty's death. The archivist returned with a thin folder. I found this in the police archives, she said. It was misfiled. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a police report dated October 20th, 1920. It documented the discovery of Robert Bennett's body in Boston Harbor, ruled a suicide. 3 days after Haverty's murder, Daniel said quietly, your great-grandfather was dead too. Eleanor sat in her grandmother's parlor, carefully transcribing the remaining diary entries. The October entries revealed a desperate woman's attempts to protect her child while grappling with terrible knowledge. The police call it suicide. Eleanor read aloud. They say Robert jumped from the wharf in despair after killing Haverty. But I know my husband. He discovered something in those accounts, something worth killing for. The watch holds the answer. Daniel examined the photographs they'd found hidden throughout the house. Robert Bennett as a young accountant, standing proudly outside the bank. Robert with his wife and infant daughter. Robert shaking hands with Thomas Haverty at a bank function, both men smiling for the camera. Your great-grandmother didn't believe her husband was a murderer, Daniel observed. She thought he was silenced because of what he knew. But why photograph my grandmother with the watch? Eleanor wondered. It practically announces their possession of evidence. Perhaps that was exactly the point, Daniel replied. Insurance. A way of saying, if anything happens to us, there's evidence. Eleanor continued reading. I commissioned the portrait today. Mr. Sullivan was reluctant to include Clara's toy in the photograph, but I insisted. Someday, when she's grown, Clara will understand why her mother did such a terrible thing. Why I let the world believe Robert was a murderer rather than a victim. The truth must survive, even if we do not. She was creating evidence, Daniel realized. Not of her husband's guilt, but of a conspiracy to frame him. Eleanor nodded slowly. The baby, my grandmother, was just a vehicle, an innocent holding proof of her father's innocence. But proof of what exactly? Daniel asked. What secret was in that watch? Eleanor turned the final page of the diary and found a small envelope glued inside. Within it lay a single yellowed piece of paper, a hand-drawn diagram of the watch's interior. Morning light slanted through the archives as Eleanor and Daniel examined newspaper accounts of Thomas Haverty's career. The banker had risen quickly in Boston's financial world following World War I, making a fortune handling European reconstruction investments. His specialty was moving money for foreign governments, Daniel noted, particularly German reparation payments. Eleanor spread out copies of the ledgers Robert had kept. These show millions disappearing from accounts meant for war-torn villages in France and Belgium. Embezzlement during humanitarian efforts, Daniel said grimly. Profiting from suffering. They turned to another file, records of Haverty's personal effects. The inventory from his study mentioned 1 gold pocket watch, gift from German Diplomatic Corps, 1919. A gift from German diplomats? Eleanor questioned. In 1919, just after Germany lost the war? Daniel's expression sharpened. That's highly unusual. Germany was broke, paying massive reparations. Eleanor unfolded the diagram from the diary. My great-grandmother drew this. The watch's interior. See these markings? They look like serial numbers. Daniel examined it closely. Not just any numbers. These match the numbered Swiss accounts in Robert's ledger. They exchanged glances as understanding dawned. The watch wasn't valuable because of gold or jewels, Eleanor whispered. It contained account information for millions in stolen funds. Robert discovered Haverty was skimming from reparation payments, Daniel added, and possibly collaborating with former German officials who wanted to hide assets from reparation collectors. When Robert threatened exposure, Eleanor continued, Haverty had him killed and staged it as suicide. But he never found the watch Robert had already taken as evidence. Your great-grandmother knew the truth would never be believed without proof, Daniel said. So she preserved the evidence in the most innocent way possible. In a baby portrait, Eleanor finished, hiding it in plain sight. The search for the actual watch consumed their next days. Eleanor systematically emptied drawers, checked behind paintings, and tapped for hollow spaces in the brownstone's walls. Daniel researched the photographer, Sullivan Studios, discovering the business had operated in Boston until 1965. Sullivan's grandson still lives in Cambridge, Daniel announced one afternoon. He inherited all the studio's records and equipment. James Sullivan, now in his 70s, welcomed them into his Victorian home filled with vintage cameras and photography memorabilia. My grandfather mentioned that portrait, James said, examining their copy. Said it was unusual. The mother was so insistent about including the watch. He kept detailed notes about his sessions. James retrieved a leather-bound appointment book from 1921. The entry for March 12th read, Bennett portrait, baby with mother's watch. Client agitated but determined, requested 2 copies, one for display, one sealed in envelope for the future. Eleanor leaned forward. 2 copies? We only found one. Grandfather mentioned something odd, James continued. The mother asked him to keep the second copy in the studio safe, with instructions it be delivered to the Boston Globe on October 17, 1940, exactly 20 years after Haverty's murder. Was it delivered? Daniel asked urgently. That's the strange part, James replied. When my father checked the safe in 1940, the envelope was empty. Just a note saying justice rendered in the same woman's handwriting. Eleanor frowned. My great-grandmother retrieved it? Why? Perhaps, Daniel suggested, because by 1940 she no longer needed insurance. Something changed. James disappeared into another room, returning with a small wooden box. This might help. Grandfather kept this with a note saying it belonged with the Bennett file. Inside lay a newspaper clipping from October 16, 1940, one day before the envelope was to be delivered. The headline read, Former bank director Heinrich Müller dies, confesses to 1920 Boston murder. Eleanor read aloud, Müller, formerly known as Harold Miller, vice president at Merchants National under Thomas Haverty, admitted on his deathbed to killing both Haverty and accountant Robert Bennett after discovering their embezzlement scheme had been exposed. Daniel looked stunned. The narrative completely reversed. Mueller claimed Haverty and your great-grandfather were co-conspirators. A final frame job, Eleanor whispered. Protecting someone even 20 years later. The Boston University archives yielded immigration records showing Harold Miller had arrived from Germany in 1919, suspiciously close to when Haverty began handling German reparation funds. Miller's real name was Heinrich Müller, Daniel noted. He worked for the German finance ministry before coming to America. He joined Haverty's bank almost immediately. Eleanor examined a photograph of bank executives from 1920. There he is, standing, right behind Haverty. Daniel pulled out additional documents from German archives. Mueller wasn't just any official. He was tasked with protecting German industrial assets from seizure after the war. So the Germans placed their man in an American bank handling reparation payments, Eleanor reasoned. With Haverty's cooperation, they diverted funds meant for war victims back to German industrialists. And your great-grandfather discovered it, Daniel added, making him a threat to both men. They pieced together the sequence. Robert Bennett discovered the scheme and took Haverty's watch as evidence. Confronting Haverty, he was instead met by Mueller, who killed Haverty, framed Robert for the murder, then killed Robert and staged it as a suicide. Mueller's confession in 1940 was his final act of protection, Daniel explained. By claiming Haverty and Robert were partners, he diverted attention from the real conspiracy, German officials hiding assets through American banks. Eleanor's fingers traced her grandmother's face in the portrait. My great-grandmother knew all this but couldn't prove it without the watch. Which brings us back to the question, Daniel said. Where is the actual watch now? Eleanor suddenly remembered something. The key from the hidden box. We never figured out what it opens. They rushed back to the brownstone, examining the small brass key again. Daniel noticed tiny lettering on its stem. First National Deposit. It's not a door key, he realized. It's for a safe deposit box. The First National Bank of Boston had long since been acquired by larger institutions, but their original vault remained as a historical feature in the downtown branch. The manager examined their documentation with skepticism. This box hasn't been accessed since 1956, she noted. We would normally require a court order, but given its age and the historical research aspect. She hesitated, then nodded. I'll make an exception. The ancient box creaked open to reveal a sealed envelope and a small package wrapped in faded velvet. Eleanor carefully unwrapped the package, revealing a gold pocket watch, tarnished but intact. The German inscription confirmed it. In appreciation for services rendered, Berlin Finance Ministry, 1919. Daniel gently opened the watch's case, revealing an intricate mechanism. Following the diagram, he pressed specific points in sequence. With a click, a hidden compartment opened in the back, containing a microfilm. This technology existed in 1920, but was rare, Daniel whispered. Perfect for hiding account numbers. Eleanor opened the envelope, finding a letter in her great-grandmother's handwriting, dated 1956. To whoever finds this, I have preserved the truth for 36 years. The watch contains proof of crimes against war victims and the framing of an innocent man, my husband. I placed it in my daughter's hands for her first portrait, creating a record that this evidence existed. Mueller's confession was his final deception. My husband discovered their scheme to divert reparation funds back to German industrialists, money meant for rebuilding lives they had destroyed. I entrust this now to history's judgment. Eleanor wiped away tears. She knew the truth might not matter in her lifetime, but she made sure it wouldn't be forgotten. Daniel replied, Your great-grandmother was extraordinarily brave. The microfilm, when developed, revealed account numbers matching Robert's ledger, the final proof of his innocence and the real conspiracy. 6 months later, Eleanor stood before an audience at the Boston Historical Society. Behind her, projected on the wall, was the 1921 portrait, a sweet baby holding evidence of international financial crimes. History is often written by those with power, Eleanor began. But sometimes, truth survives in unexpected ways. She unveiled a new exhibition, Justice Deferred, the Robert Bennett Case. It displayed the watch, The diary, the ledgers, and documents they'd gathered, proving Robert's innocence and exposing the German-American financial conspiracy. Daniel joined her at the podium. This case rewrites a piece of post-World War I history. It shows how German officials conspired with American bankers to divert reparation funds, money meant for devastated European communities. After the presentation, Eleanor found a quiet moment with the portrait of her grandmother as a baby. The innocent child had unknowingly carried a burden of truth for decades. "We published our findings in the Historical Journal," Daniel said, approaching with 2 glasses of champagne. "The New York Times is running a feature next week." Eleanor smiled sadly. "I wish my grandmother had lived to see this. She grew up never knowing her father was a hero, not a murderer." "Your great-grandmother would be proud," Daniel replied. "She preserved the truth against impossible odds." Outside, snow began falling on Boston's historic streets. Eleanor thought about layers of history, how cities, like memories, build upon what came before, sometimes burying truths beneath new constructions. "What happens to the watch now?" Daniel asked. "It goes to the Museum of American History," Eleanor replied, "where everyone can see it and remember that sometimes history's most important evidence is hidden in plain sight, in the hands of a child."